Most obsessions stay harmless, but every once in a while, someone takes fiction way too seriously, and real life pays the price. This first case sounds like fiction, but it happened in real life, with real victims, real investigators, and people who took an anime way too seriously. For most anime fans, obsession stays online. People argue about characters, buy merch, write unhinged forum posts, and embarrass themselves at conventions. It usually ends there. In Belgium in 2007, that line was crossed in a way nobody expected, and the results confused police, media, and the public for years.
Shelby County school officials say that the list, called Death Note, belonged to an East Middle School student and contained names of other students and staff. WLKY's Corey Pippin spoke to school officials and parents today.
On September 28, 2007, two hikers were walking through Parc de la Citadelle in Brussels when they noticed something unnatural in the grass. At first, they thought it was trash or dumped clothing, but when they got closer, they realized it was human remains. The body had been deliberately dismembered and placed in the open. The torso and legs were present, but the head and arms were missing. There were no personal belongings nearby, no wallet, no phone, and no identifying documents. This was not a careless disposal. Someone wanted the body to be found exactly where it was. Police arrived quickly and secured the area. Almost immediately, investigators realized this case was unusual. Near the remains were handwritten notes placed deliberately on the ground. The notes were written in Japanese. One message read, "Watashi wa Kira," which roughly translates to "I am Kira," although the grammar was incorrect. The phrase directly referenced Death Note, a popular anime and manga series where the main character kills criminals using a supernatural notebook and adopts the name Kira, meaning killer or god of death.
Not only got her suspended, it led to an investigation. NBC4's Rick Reisel traveled to Hebron to find out what happened.
The girl told authorities she was copying a children's TV show called Death Notes.
The staging did not stop there. Investigators also discovered a trail of rice grains leading away from the body. The trail ended at a symbol formed on the ground. The symbol looked like Japanese writing to casual observers, but linguistic experts later confirmed it was not a real character. It had no actual meaning. It appeared symbolic rather than linguistic, which suggested imitation rather than genuine cultural understanding. At this stage, police had very little to work with. The victim was described as a Caucasian male between 20 and 30 years old. The cuts were clean and precise, which raised questions about whether the person responsible had medical training or experience with sharp instruments. However, forensic testing could not confirm professional involvement. There were no fingerprints, no DNA matches in databases, and no immediate missing persons reports that matched the description. The lack of leads caused the case to explode in the media. Belgian news outlets and international tabloids picked up the story almost immediately. The combination of dismemberment, Japanese writing, and anime references was too strange to ignore. Some media suggested the murder might have been a prank gone wrong by medical students, especially since the discovery happened near the start of the academic year. Universities in Brussels publicly denied any connection and pointed out how unrealistic that theory actually was. Some speculation went even further. Certain journalists suggested the killing was the work of a serial offender inspired by Death Note. Others attempted to connect it to the so-called Butcher of Mons, an unidentified killer active between 1996 and 1997. That theory gained attention due to the brutality of the scene, but investigators found no physical or behavioral evidence linking the cases. As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. Police could not identify the victim and had no credible suspects. The staged element of the crime distracted from the fact that this was a single homicide. By November 2007, authorities admitted the case had reached a dead end, and public attention slowly faded. For nearly 3 years, the file remained inactive. No new evidence emerged, and the anime references remained a curiosity rather than a lead. In September 2010, arrests were finally announced. The reality was far less theatrical than the scene suggested. The victim had been living with several of the suspects. A dispute inside the apartment escalated into violence when he refused to leave, and he was beaten to death. The killing was not planned. It was followed by panic. The suspects attempted to destroy the body using chemical cleaners. When decomposition became impossible to conceal, they dismembered the remains and disposed of them in Parc de la Citadelle. The Death Note references were added later. The suspects admitted they were fans of the anime and used the notes to mislead investigators. The strategy worked. The staging delayed the investigation and shifted attention away from the real crime scene. In June 2013, the legal process concluded. 2 suspects were sentenced to 20 years in prison for their roles in the killing and disposal of the body. A 3rd suspect received a 23-year sentence after fleeing during the trial process. Another individual was convicted of failing to assist a person in danger, a charge reflecting their inaction during the fatal assault. The case ended not as a supernatural mystery or an anime-inspired manifesto, but as a reminder of how panic, immaturity, and poor judgment can turn a violent incident into something far worse. What made the crime famous was not the killing itself, but the decision to turn it into a spectacle. In the end, Death Note had nothing to do with the murder. It only became a mask that delayed justice and turned a tragic death into an international media circus. If the last story showed obsession turning theatrical, this one shows how obsession turns personal, dangerous, and very real very fast. In Japan's idol culture, fans are everywhere. Most are respectful, supportive, and harmless. One fan in 2016 proved how dangerous obsession can become when warning signs are ignored. Maya Tomita, age 20, was a business student and aspiring singer. She performed at small venues and restaurants while building her audience. In 2015, she met Tomohiro Iwazaki, a 26-year-old man who attended her performances regularly. At first, his behavior seemed normal. He gave her small gifts and supported her music. Over time, his behavior escalated. He began sending frequent messages, documenting her movements online and showing up repeatedly. He had a known history of stalking idols and had already been reported to the police in previous cases. In April 2016, Iwazaki proposed to Tomita at one of her performances. He presented her with an expensive gold watch and books. Tomita rejected him politely, but gave him her Twitter account, which he interpreted as intimacy. After that, his behavior changed. Iwazaki began sending hundreds of messages, accusing her of looking down on him and threatening her life. Tomita returned his gifts and blocked him. She filed a police report on May 9, 2016, stating she feared for her safety. Police took no action, claiming online harassment did not meet the legal threshold under Japan's stalking laws at the time. On May 21, 2016, Tomita arrived at Small Girl Night Volume 11, a live music event held in Tokyo where she was scheduled to perform. As she approached the venue entrance, she was confronted by Iwazaki, who had been waiting for her. The encounter was sudden and unplanned. When Tomita attempted to move away and escape the situation, Iwazaki pulled out a knife and attacked her. He stabbed her 61 times in the chest and neck area while shouting threats, continuing the assault even as she collapsed. The attack happened in public, with bystanders nearby who quickly realized something was terribly wrong. Witnesses immediately called emergency services. Police arrived within minutes, and Iwazaki was arrested at the scene without resisting. The knife used in the attack was recovered, and the incident was treated as attempted murder from the start. Tomita survived despite overwhelming odds. She was hospitalized in critical condition and remained unconscious for weeks. On June 7, 2016, she regained consciousness. Although she lived, the damage was permanent. She suffered severe injuries that affected her speech and limited the movement in her hands. She also developed serious post-traumatic stress disorder. As a result of these injuries and psychological trauma, her music career came to an end. Iwazaki was later sentenced to 14 years in prison. The sentence sparked widespread public outrage. Many criticized law enforcement for failing to intervene earlier, especially since Tomita had reported his behavior and expressed fear for her safety before the attack. The case ultimately led to legal change. Japan revised its anti-stalking laws to include online harassment and social media threats, closing a major gap that had previously limited police action. While the reform came too late to protect Tomita, it ensured that similar warnings could no longer be dismissed as harmless online behavior. Up to this point, the damage was targeted, but this next case shows what happens when resentment stops aiming at one person and starts burning everything around it. On July 18, 2019, Japan experienced one of the deadliest mass killings in modern history, an event that would permanently scar the anime industry and shock the world. Kyoto Animation, widely known as KyoAni, was one of the most respected animation studios in the world. It was praised not only for its work, but also for its humane working conditions and close-knit creative culture. Studio 1, located in Kyoto's Fushimi Ward, served as a primary production site where animators, writers, and designers worked closely together. That morning, shortly after 10 a.m., a man named Shinji Aoba, age 41, approached the studio carrying multiple containers holding approximately 11 gallons of gasoline. He entered the building calmly and without resistance. Within moments, he poured gasoline across the ground floor and ignited it. The fire spread instantly. An explosion occurred at approximately 10:31 a.m., likely caused by gasoline vapor igniting in the enclosed space. Thick black smoke filled the stairwells in under 30 seconds, cutting off escape routes almost immediately. Many employees were trapped above the flames with no clear way out. 70 people were inside the building at the time. 36 employees were killed, most from severe burns or carbon monoxide poisoning. Others survived but suffered life-altering injuries, including permanent lung damage, mobility loss, and psychological trauma. The building did not have a sprinkler system, as it was legally classified as a small office structure under Japanese building regulations, a fact that later sparked widespread debate and reform discussions. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the intensity of the fire made the rescue extremely difficult. The blaze was not fully extinguished until the following day. Aoba was also severely burned during the attack and collapsed at the scene. He was taken into custody and hospitalized for months while undergoing extensive treatment. During his recovery, he admitted responsibility for the attack. His stated motive was deeply delusional. Aoba believed that Kyoto Animation had plagiarized an unpublished novel he had submitted years earlier. His claims focused on trivial similarities, such as scenes involving discount signs, common phrases, or background banners. Investigators confirmed that none of these elements met any legal or creative definition of plagiarism. The studio had rejected his submission at an early stage and had no documented connection to his work. Further investigation revealed that Aoba had a prior criminal record, including robbery and a documented history of mental health struggles. Despite this background, no intervention occurred that could have prevented the attack. In January 2024, after years of legal proceedings, Shinji Aoba was sentenced to death by hanging. He accepted the sentence without appeal. The impact of the attack was immense. Kyoto Animation lost some of its most experienced and beloved creators, including directors, animators, and designers who had shaped modern anime. Tributes and memorials appeared across Japan and around the world. Fans held vigils, donated millions to support victims, and honored the lives lost. Kyoto Animation later rebuilt operations at a different location, choosing resilience over silence. This case remains a stark reminder that obsession, entitlement, and untreated mental illness can combine into irreversible harm when warning signs are ignored. It was not only an attack on a studio, but an attack on creativity, trust, and human life itself. After seeing how anger explodes outward, this case flips the script and shows how obsession dressed as love can be just as violent. At 4 p.m. on May 23, 2019, Tokyo police received a call that sounded unreal even by city standards. A man was bleeding heavily in the lobby of an apartment building, and witnesses said the scene was strangely calm. When officers arrived, they found a young woman sitting on the floor, covered in blood, scrolling through her phone. Beside her lay a man barely conscious, struggling to breathe as blood pooled around him. The woman was Yuka Takaoka, then 21 years old, a manager at a hostess club and an anime fan known online for cosplay and live streaming. The man was Phoenix Luna, a host at a male host club in Tokyo. Their connection was not a traditional relationship, but one rooted in Japan's host club industry, where customers pay large sums of money for attention, conversation, and emotional performance, but not exclusivity or real commitment. Takaoka met Luna earlier that year at the host club where he worked. At the time, Luna was not one of the club's top earners. That changed quickly after Takaoka became a regular customer. Financial records later showed she was spending as much as 1 million yen per month, roughly $10,000, on champagne, private reservations, and extended time with Luna. In the host club system, spending directly affects rankings, and Luna rose rapidly, eventually becoming the top-ranked host. As Luna's popularity grew, so did Takaoka's emotional attachment. She began to believe that the relationship was genuine rather than transactional. She rented an apartment near Luna's workplace and pressured him to stay there part-time. Luna agreed to spend time there, but maintained that their connection remained professional. This imbalance created a dangerous dynamic. On one side was fantasy and emotional investment. On the other was a job that required performance and compliance. The situation escalated when Takaoka began demanding control over Luna's work. She insisted that he notify her every time he met another client, despite the fact that hosting other customers was his job. Luna initially complied, likely attempting to avoid conflict while continuing to work. On May 23, 2019, Luna informed Takaoka that he would be meeting another woman for work. Rather than reassurance, this message triggered intense jealousy and emotional instability. Later that night, Luna returned to the apartment they shared intermittently. He took a bath and went to sleep, unaware of what was about to happen. At approximately 3:50 a.m., Takaoka attacked him while he slept, stabbing him in the abdomen with a kitchen knife. Luna woke up in shock and managed to push her away. Despite severe injuries, he attempted to escape. He ran toward the elevator, then collapsed in the lobby of the building due to blood loss. Takaoka followed him, sat beside him on the floor, and waited. Witnesses later described her behavior as disturbingly calm. She did not attempt to flee or seek help. A passerby recorded the scene before calling emergency services. That video spread rapidly online and became one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. Luna was rushed to the hospital and underwent emergency surgery. Doctors later stated that his chance of survival was less than 20%. He remained hospitalized for weeks and suffered permanent liver damage. Despite this, he eventually recovered enough to walk, speak, and resume daily life. He later returned to the host industry, though he could no longer drink alcohol due to his injuries. During interviews, Luna shocked the public by stating that he forgave Takaoka. He described her as someone who needed help rather than hatred, a response that many people struggled to understand. Takaoka was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for attempted murder. The legal outcome sparked widespread debate. Many criticized the sentence as too lenient, given the severity of the attack. Others focused on what happened next online. Instead of universal condemnation, parts of the internet romanticized Takaoka. Users edited photos of her, created fan art, and labeled her a real-life yandere, an anime trope involving obsessive and violent love. The case became a disturbing example of how fiction, appearance, and online culture can distort real-world violence. At its core, this case was not about anime or aesthetics. It was about entitlement, emotional imbalance, and the consequences of mistaking a paid fantasy for reality. It remains one of the clearest warnings of how obsession can turn deadly when boundaries collapse. Not every collapse starts with obsession or hatred, because sometimes it starts quietly with stress, isolation, and a person who never learned how to ask for help.
Our next story tonight comes from Japan, and before I dive into the details, I want to warn you. This story will leave you shocked, appalled, perhaps even dejected, because it is an indicator of where we're headed as a society. Do you know what people in Japan are doing? They're killing their parents. They're murdering the elderly. Why?
Junji Matsumoto, born in 1962, lived a life that drew very little attention. He had no known criminal record, no history of violence, and no public incidents that suggest danger. For most of his adult life, he existed quietly on the margins of society in Japan, largely invisible to anyone outside his immediate family. Junji struggled socially from a young age. After finishing school, he briefly entered the workforce, but left early after failing to adjust to workplace expectations and social pressure. He did not re-enter full-time employment. Instead, he spent decades living with his parents, watching anime, reading manga, and helping occasionally at the family liquor store. He had no close friends, no romantic relationships, and no real support system beyond his family. For many years, this arrangement remained stable. His parents ran the store, handled finances, and managed daily life. Junji remained dependent but functional within that structure. That balance collapsed as his parents aged. The liquor store eventually closed due to competition and declining business. His parents retired, removing the last external structure in the household. By 2021, Junji had become the primary caregiver for both parents. His father developed dementia, which progressed steadily and required constant supervision. His mother suffered serious mobility issues and needed help with daily tasks. Care facilities were financially impossible. Home care services were limited and inconsistent. Junji, who had never developed emotional coping skills or stress management tools, was suddenly responsible for round-the-clock care. The pressure accumulated silently. Junji rarely left the house. He slept irregularly, spent most of his time watching television, and had no outlet for frustration. Relatives later stated that he appeared withdrawn and exhausted in the months leading up to the incident. Welfare visits were scheduled, but Junji viewed them as stressful interruptions rather than support. On June 20, 2021, the situation reached its breaking point. Junji was watching television when his father asked for help using the toilet. According to Junji's later testimony, the request came repeatedly and urgently. What might have been a routine caregiving task triggered a sudden emotional collapse. Years of isolation, resentment, exhaustion, and suppressed anger erupted in a single moment. Junji grabbed an electrical cord and strangled his father. His mother witnessed the attack and attempted to intervene. In a state of panic and fear, Junji killed her as well. The acts were not premeditated, but they were deliberate and fatal. Afterward, Junji did not call emergency services. Instead, he attempted to conceal what had happened. He placed both bodies inside a large commercial freezer that had once been used for inventory at the liquor store. He sealed the freezer shut and left it inside the home. In the days that followed, Junji attempted to erase signs of normal activity. He canceled scheduled welfare visits and postponed medical appointments. He withdrew money from his parents' accounts and used their credit cards. Then he fled. Over several days, he traveled across Japan using trains and a bicycle, staying in low-cost hotels and avoiding prolonged contact with anyone. Concerned relatives eventually requested a welfare check on June 28, 2021. When police entered the home, they immediately noticed a strong odor. Upon opening the freezer, they discovered the bodies of both parents. A nationwide search was launched for Junji. On July 4, 2021, police located him in a hotel parking lot in Kyoto using surveillance footage and transactional records. He was arrested without resistance and confessed shortly afterward. During his trial, Junji spoke about years of emotional pressure, social isolation, and caregiver burnout. Multiple psychiatric evaluations were conducted. While experts acknowledged his psychological distress, they concluded that he understood his actions and their consequences. On July 6, 2021, Junji Matsumoto was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The case shocked Japan, not because of its brutality, but because of its familiarity. It exposed the hidden risks of caregiver burnout, aging populations, and social isolation. It served as a grim reminder that quiet lives can still reach breaking points when pressure builds without support. And finally, this last case explains why the word otaku stopped being harmless in Japan, and why one man permanently changed how an entire subculture was viewed. Tsutomu Miyazaki was born in 1962 in Japan into a wealthy family that owned a newspaper distribution business. On the surface, his childhood appeared comfortable and privileged. He attended a respected school and performed well academically. However, socially, Miyazaki was deeply isolated. He struggled to connect with classmates and was frequently bullied. A visible hand deformity made him an easy target, and over time, he withdrew further into himself. Despite his academic success, Miyazaki lacked emotional support at home. His parents were distant and largely absent, focused on business and social status rather than his well-being. The one person who provided him with genuine care and attention was his grandfather. Miyazaki spent much of his free time with him, and for years this relationship served as his emotional anchor. As Miyazaki entered adolescence, his isolation worsened. He had no close friends and no romantic relationships. He began spending long hours alone, consuming media. His interests shifted from ordinary entertainment toward increasingly graphic material, including violent horror films. These habits intensified after his grandfather died in 1988. The loss marked a sharp turning point. Without the only stabilizing presence in his life, Miyazaki's mental state deteriorated rapidly. Between August 1988 and June 1989, Miyazaki committed a series of crimes that horrified Japan. He abducted 4 young girls, all under the age of 7, from public places such as parks and residential areas. He lured them into his vehicle, murdered them, and committed acts of extreme violence afterward. The crimes were not impulsive. They followed a pattern showing planning, concealment, and repetition. Miyazaki went further than murder. He contacted the families of his victims, sending letters, postcards, and packages that contained remains and personal items. These messages were deliberately cruel, written to cause maximum emotional pain. In some cases, he described the deaths in disturbing detail. He also made anonymous phone calls in which he said nothing, allowing only his breathing to be heard. The police investigation initially struggled. Miyazaki was cautious and avoided detection for months. His arrest came on July 23, 1989, when the father of a potential victim confronted him in a park. Miyazaki fled, leaving his car behind. Police staked out the vehicle and arrested him when he returned. What authorities found inside his apartment stunned the nation. Investigators discovered 5,763 videotapes stacked throughout the rooms. The collection included anime, horror movies, pornography, and recordings connected to his crimes. Media coverage immediately fixated on this detail, linking his crimes to his consumption of anime and manga. During interrogation and trial, Miyazaki claimed insanity. He described an alter ego he called the Rat Man, insisting that this figure committed the murders. He drew images to support his story and spoke in ways that appeared deliberately theatrical. Multiple psychiatric teams evaluated him. Their conclusions varied. Some diagnosed severe mental illness, while others determined that he understood his actions and attempted to manipulate the legal process. Ultimately, the court ruled that Miyazaki was criminally responsible. On April 14, 1997, he was sentenced to death. He remained on death row for over a decade and was executed in 2008. The aftermath of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. Japanese media labeled Miyazaki the otaku murderer, creating a lasting stigma around anime fans, introverted individuals, and people with unconventional hobbies. The term otaku became associated with danger, deviance, and social failure. despite no evidence that fandom itself caused the crimes. The case permanently altered how crime, mental illness, and media consumption were discussed in Japan. It also raised difficult questions about isolation, untreated psychological decline, and the consequences of sensationalist reporting. Miyazaki's crimes remain among the most disturbing in modern Japanese history, not only for what he did, but for how society struggled to understand and explain it. In the end, these cases are not about fiction, trends, or fandoms. They are about real people, real harm, and the irreversible moments that change lives forever. Behind every headline is a person who once lived an ordinary life, with routines, relationships, and hopes that slowly unraveled. What begins as fascination often turns into fixation, and when that fixation is left unchecked, the consequences can be devastating. Again and again, the same patterns appear. Obsession grows quietly. Isolation deepens. Warning signs surface but are dismissed as harmless quirks, jokes, or temporary phases. Friends step back. Families hesitate. Institutions overlook what seems too small to matter, until one day it matters more than anyone could have imagined. These stories force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Harm rarely arrives without warning. It creeps in through silence, through ignored behaviors, through moments when intervention felt awkward or unnecessary. The tragedy is not only what happened in the end, but how many chances there were to change the outcome before it was too late. What makes these cases even more haunting is how ordinary they seem in hindsight. There is rarely a single dramatic turning point that announces what is coming. Instead, there are small moments that feel insignificant at the time. A comment brushed aside, a behavior excused, a feeling ignored. Each moment alone seems harmless. Together, they form a path that becomes harder to leave with every step. Time also plays a dangerous role. The longer the signs are overlooked, the more normalized they become. What once felt alarming slowly feels familiar. Concern turns into tolerance. Silence replaces action. By the time the danger is undeniable, the opportunity to intervene has often already passed. And yet, even after everything, questions remain. What was the exact moment when things crossed the line? Who noticed first and who chose to look away? What could have been done differently if someone had taken one warning seriously? Just one. These unanswered questions linger long after the case fades from public attention. Remembering the facts matters, not because of shock value, but because understanding the truth is the only way to recognize the signs when they appear again. History does not repeat itself in identical ways, but it often follows familiar rhythms. The details change, the platforms evolve, the obsession finds new forms, but the underlying patterns remain disturbingly consistent. As we move forward, the responsibility does not belong to one person, one group, or one system. It belongs to all of us. To pay attention, to question what we normalize, to speak up when something feels wrong, even when it is uncomfortable to do so. Because the next case is never announced in advance. It is already forming somewhere, quietly, unnoticed. And the difference between another tragedy and a prevented one may depend on whether someone remembers these stories and chooses to act before the final chapter is written. And that raises one final question, perhaps the most unsettling of all. When the warning signs appear again, and they will we recognize them this time?